The funeral had begun before the dead man was truly gone, and someone at the graveside knew exactly why. Welcome to Mystery Files. I am your host, Raven. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from today. I always love hearing from our wonderful mystery community. Your presence makes every story more memorable. Now, let's uncover the truth. There are certain cases which, even after the passing of many years, remain fixed within my memory with a peculiar vividness. They are not always the most sensational, nor those most celebrated in the public journals, but rather those in which the human mind, with all its curious blend of reason, vanity, fear, and deception, revealed itself in the most extraordinary fashion. Of these, few impressed me more deeply than the singular affair which Holmes later referred to, with characteristic simplicity, as the case of the funeral held too soon. The events occurred during the bleak November of 1894, when a dense yellow fog had settled over London for several successive days, muffling the clatter of carriage wheels and reducing even the busiest thoroughfares to silent corridors of shadow. Baker Street itself seemed wrapped in an unnatural stillness, while the windows of our sitting room admitted little more than a dim amber glow from the gas lamps beyond. Holmes, whose restless intellect suffered greatly during periods without an engaging problem, had spent the greater portion of 3 days alternating between his violin, his chemical apparatus, and long intervals of silent contemplation. I had learned from experience that such moods were dangerous. When deprived of intellectual exercise, Holmes became as impatient as a thoroughbred horse, confined too long within its stable. On that particular morning, I found him standing beside the window, his lean figure scarcely moving as he gazed into the impenetrable curtain of fog. "It is remarkable, Watson," he observed without turning, "how eagerly mankind accepts what it wishes to believe." "I confess I fail to see the connection," said I, laying aside my medical journal. "There rarely is one at first. Connections are discovered, not presented." I smiled. "You speak as though you are already engaged upon a case." "I am engaged upon a philosophical irritation, which is the tendency of intelligent men to mistake appearances for evidence." Before I could inquire further, Holmes wheeled suddenly toward me. "You passed Sergeant Willis on the staircase this morning." "I did no such thing." "You are perfectly certain?" "I have not left these rooms since breakfast." Holmes's eyes sparkled. "Excellent. Then Sergeant Willis called yesterday evening. You astonish me. I never mentioned seeing him." "You did not need to." He pointed lazily toward my overcoat. "There is a fresh smear of blue chalk upon your sleeve. Scotland Yard marks evidence crates with precisely that compound. The chalk has been partially brushed away, indicating casual contact rather than deliberate handling. Moreover, your umbrella bears dried clay, peculiar to the courtyard behind yard headquarters. You attended there yesterday after visiting your patient in Paddington." I stared at him. "I certainly visited Mrs. Ellison in Paddington, but how could you possibly know I afterward called upon Scotland Yard?" "Because you neglected to remove the official visitor's pass from your waistcoat pocket." With a laugh, I produced the folded card. "I might accuse you of cheating. My dear Watson, observation only appears miraculous to those who overlook the obvious." His expression softened. "You see, even honest men conceal evidence from themselves." Before I could frame a reply, the familiar sound of hurried footsteps ascended the 17 stairs leading to our rooms. Mrs. Hudson admitted a gentleman whose appearance instantly commanded our attention. He was perhaps 50 years of age, impeccably dressed, despite signs of considerable agitation. His black mourning attire was of the finest quality, though hurriedly donned. Rain and fog clung to his overcoat, while one leather glove remained half-buttoned as though he had dressed without assistance. Most striking, however, was his face. It was not grief alone that marked it. It was bewilderment. He removed his hat with mechanical politeness. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes." Holmes inclined his head. "I am Gregory Ashcombe," the visitor began, "solicitor to the Ashcombe family of Blackthorn Hall in Surrey. I fear I bring a matter so extraordinary that I scarcely expect belief." Holmes motioned toward the armchair. "You shall receive belief only where evidence warrants it. Pray continue." The solicitor hesitated. "My employer," Sir Reginald Ashcombe died 3 days ago. Holmes merely nodded. So his physician declared. And yet, the funeral is tomorrow morning. Holmes steepled his fingers. You would not be here unless something has rendered that funeral premature. The solicitor looked up sharply. How did you know? Because no solicitor travels through London fog merely to discuss a routine burial. The man's composure began to fail. Yesterday evening, while reviewing Sir Reginald's personal effects, I discovered a sealed envelope addressed in his own handwriting. He withdrew a thick cream-colored envelope from his breast pocket. The instructions upon its exterior stated that it was not to be opened until after his death. Holmes accepted it without opening the seal. The envelope had indeed remained unopened. I personally verified the family seal. And its contents, Gregory Ashcombe swallowed. It contained only one sentence. He spoke the words slowly. If they bury me before Thursday, they shall commit murder. Silence filled our sitting room. Even Holmes, who seldom betrayed surprise, allowed several moments to pass before speaking. Sir Reginald was certified dead on what day? Monday. And tomorrow is Wednesday. Precisely. You have informed the family. They dismissed it as the eccentricity of an aging gentleman. The attending physician. He insists there can be no mistake. Holmes leaned back. Cause of death? Heart failure. Was an examination performed? A routine one. No post-mortem? No. Holmes finally broke the envelope's seal and studied the handwriting through his magnifying lens. It is unquestionably genuine. You believe him? I believe, said Holmes carefully, that Sir Reginald expected precisely this reaction. The solicitor leaned forward anxiously. There is more. I expected as much. Late last night, one of the household servants reported hearing footsteps within the locked family mausoleum. Watson instinctively shifted in his chair. The mausoleum? It already contains several generations of the Ashcombe family. Sir Reginald's coffin was placed there temporarily until tomorrow's funeral service. And the footsteps? The servant fled in terror. Holmes looked almost amused. Servants possess vivid imaginations. I would agree, replied the solicitor, had we not inspected the mausoleum this morning. And the coffin had been moved. I could not suppress an exclamation. Moved? Several feet. Holmes spoke quietly. Any signs of forced entry? None. The coffin opened? No. The lock's intact? Perfectly. Holmes rose from his chair and crossed toward the fireplace. There are 3 possibilities. The solicitor watched him anxiously. Either the servant lied, he raised one finger, or someone entered with a key, a second finger, or Sir Reginald Ashcombe was not as dead as everyone believed. The room became utterly still. The solicitor whispered, "Surely you do not suggest." I suggest nothing. Suggestions are dangerous. Facts alone deserve our loyalty. Holmes turned suddenly toward me. Watson. Yes? Pack your revolver. My revolver? And your medical bag. You believe there may yet be a patient? I believe, Holmes answered, reaching for his violin before laying it aside almost immediately, that when a gentleman leaves behind a warning against his own funeral, one should arrive before the mourners. Outside, the church bells of Marylebone drifted faintly through the fog, their solemn notes swallowed almost as quickly as they were born. Within the hour, Holmes and I were bound for Blackthorn Hall, unaware that before another sunset, the mystery would deepen beyond anything Scotland Yard, or even I, could have imagined. Our journey from Waterloo was conducted beneath a sky of uniform grey, while the damp countryside slipped past the carriage windows in blurred fields and black hedgerows. Holmes spoke little. He sat opposite me with his long fingers pressed together, his eyes half closed, yet I knew from the occasional tightening of his lips that his mind was moving rapidly among the few facts already before us. Gregory Ashcombe occupied the corner beside him. The solicitor had regained some measure of composure, though he repeatedly consulted his watch. "The funeral service is arranged for 10 tomorrow morning," he said. "The family has refused to postpone it." "Who refused?" Holmes asked without opening his eyes. "Sir Reginald's eldest son, Charles Ashcombe. He has inherited the title. And the estate. That matter is less straightforward." Holmes opened his eyes. "Indeed." Blackthorn Hall passes to Charles, but much of Sir Reginald's private fortune is distributed according to a separate testament. The will is to be read after the funeral. How many persons benefit? 4 principally. Charles, his younger sister, Miss Eleanor Ashcombe, Sir Reginald's nephew, Julian Fane, and Dr. Percival Wren, who has attended the family for many years. A physician named in a patient's will is always interesting. Ashcombe frowned. There is nothing improper in it. Dr. Wren was Sir Reginald's closest friend. Friendship and money are not mutually exclusive, said Holmes. Who discovered the body? Charles. He entered the library shortly after 7 on Monday morning and found his father collapsed beside the writing desk. Was the room locked? No. Windows? Fastened from within. Any medicine nearby? A small bottle of heart drops stood upon the desk. Prescribed by Dr. Wren. Yes. Holmes settled back again. And the warning letter was found where? In a locked compartment of Sir Reginald's bureau. I possessed the second key because it contained documents relating to the estate. Then someone besides Sir Reginald knew you could open it. The solicitor's face altered slightly. I had not considered that. That is why you came to me. The remainder of the journey passed in silence. At the small station of Merehaven, a closed carriage awaited us. We drove for nearly 4 miles along narrow roads overhung by bare trees, whose branches clawed at the mist. Blackthorn Hall appeared at last upon a low rise, a great Jacobean house of dark brick, its chimneys and gables standing like broken teeth against the colorless sky. No lamps showed in the upper windows. The entire place seemed less a family residence than a building already abandoned to mourning. A thin, severe man was waiting beneath the portico. His black coat was perfectly cut, and his pale face bore an expression of controlled displeasure. "Mr. Gregory," he said as we descended, "we had begun to wonder whether you intended to return." "This is Mr. Sherlock Holmes," replied the solicitor, "and Dr. Watson." The man's eyes moved from Holmes to me. "Charles Ashcombe," said he, "I cannot imagine why a private detective has been brought into a domestic tragedy." Holmes glanced at the mourning band upon Charles's sleeve. A tragedy, perhaps. Whether it is domestic remains to be determined. Charles stiffened. "My father died from a diseased heart. Dr. Wren certified it. The matter is concluded. Dead men sometimes leave inconvenient sentences behind them. So Gregory has told us. My father had become increasingly morbid during his final months. He was obsessed with the possibility of premature burial. Was he? Charles gave a short, humorless laugh. He ordered bells placed in the mausoleum coffins so that the deceased might summon assistance. He purchased mechanical breathing devices. He even instructed the servants never to nail down his coffin lid before the final service. That last instruction was followed, yes, though I fail to see why it matters. It matters because the coffin can be opened. For the first time, Charles's composure slipped. That will not be permitted. Holmes's gaze sharpened. "My dear sir, your father's written warning suggests that burial before Thursday would constitute murder. I am here to determine whether he wrote from madness, fear, or knowledge. The coffin is the most direct place to begin. The family will not tolerate desecration. If the occupant is alive, opening it is rescue. If he is dead, it is examination. Desecration is merely a word employed when reason becomes uncomfortable." Charles turned abruptly to Gregory Ashcombe. "You had no authority to involve this man." "I had a moral duty," the solicitor replied. Their exchange was interrupted by the arrival of a young woman descending the broad staircase beyond the entrance hall. She was dressed in black, but unlike her brother, she appeared genuinely exhausted by grief. Her dark hair had been hastily arranged, and her eyes were red from lack of sleep. "Charles," she said, "there is no use pretending nothing is wrong." "This is my sister, Eleanor," he said coldly. She looked at Holmes with sudden hope. "You came because of father's letter?" "I did." "Then you must see the mausoleum." Charles stepped between them. "Eleanor, enough." "No." Her voice trembled but did not weaken. He heard it too. "Who?" "Julian. Last night, after the servant fled, Julian went to the chapel grounds. He heard knocking from inside the coffin. A silence heavier than any we had yet experienced settled over the hall. Holmes's face became utterly still. "Where is Mr. Fane now?" "No one knows," she answered. "He disappeared before dawn." Holmes turned toward our host. "I think, Sir Charles, that we shall postpone the drawing room and proceed directly to the dead." 10 minutes later, we crossed the frost-darkened lawn toward the family chapel. Beyond it stood the mausoleum, a squat stone structure half concealed by yew trees. The iron door was secured by a heavy chain and padlock. Charles produced the key with evident reluctance. When the door swung inward, a breath of cold, stale air passed over us. Holmes entered first, lantern raised. Stone shelves lined the walls, bearing old coffins beneath carved tablets. At the center stood Sir Reginald's polished oak casket. Even before Holmes reached it, I saw the marks upon the flagstones. The coffin had indeed been dragged from its original position. Holmes knelt beside it, studying the floor, the handles, and the narrow gap beneath the lid. Then he held the lantern close to the brass plate. "What is it?" I whispered. He did not answer. Instead, he removed his magnifying lens and examined 3 pale scratches near the lock. At last he rose. "This coffin has been opened since it was brought here." Charles stared at him. "That is impossible." Holmes placed one hand upon the lid. "On the contrary, what concerns me is not that it was opened." His eyes moved slowly across the faces around him. "It is that someone took great care to close it again." The silence which followed Holmes's observation seemed to draw every trace of warmth from the mausoleum. Even the flame of Gregory Ashcombe's lantern flickered uncertainly, casting long, wavering shadows over the ancient stone vault. Charles Ashcombe was the first to recover himself. "This is absurd," he declared, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "No one has touched my father's coffin." Holmes remained kneeling beside it. "My dear sir, brass does not scratch itself, nor does fresh wax gather beneath a lock that has remained undisturbed." He pointed to a tiny bead of hardened sealing wax, lodged near one hinge. "When this coffin was prepared on Monday, the undertaker sealed the fastening. That seal has been broken, and another applied. The color differs ever so slightly. Whoever opened it possessed sufficient care to imitate the original, but insufficient knowledge to reproduce the exact mixture. Watson, accustomed though I had become to Holmes's remarkable powers, found myself bending closer. The distinction was invisible until Holmes directed my attention to it. Gregory Ashcombe removed his spectacles. "Good heavens, he is correct." Charles frowned. "The undertaker himself may have done it." "Then we shall ask him," Holmes replied calmly. "Until then, let us refrain from comforting ourselves with assumptions." He examined the stone floor once more, before directing his lantern toward the rear wall. "There are footprints." The rest of us approached cautiously. The dust covering the older flagstones had been disturbed by several impressions. Most were confused by the movements of those now present. But beyond the coffin, where the others had not ventured, a single clear print remained. Holmes measured it with his eye. "A gentleman's boot," he murmured. "Julian's?" Eleanor asked quietly. "Perhaps." Charles folded his arms. "My cousin wandered here after the servant frightened himself with ghost stories." "That proves nothing." "No," Holmes agreed. "It proves only that someone entered after the coffin had already been placed here." He paused before adding, "and someone departed again." His attention shifted to the iron door. "The lock." Gregory handed him the key. Holmes examined both carefully before returning them. "There are no signs of forced entry." "Then only family members could have entered," said Charles, "or anyone possessing access to the keys." The solicitor looked uneasy. "There are 3 keys." "Indeed. One remains with me. One belongs to Sir Charles. The third has always been entrusted to the family physician, Dr. Percival Wren, in case illness or accident required immediate access to the chapel." Holmes looked thoughtfully toward the distant hall, barely visible through the mist beyond the open doorway. "I believe it is time we met the doctor. We found Dr. Wren in the library, where Sir Reginald had died. He was a man of perhaps 60 years, silver-haired and broad-shouldered, with intelligent blue eyes that conveyed confidence born of long experience. His manner possessed none of Charles Ashcombe's defensiveness. Instead, he greeted Holmes with courteous curiosity. "I have heard much of you, Mr. Holmes. I hope nothing exaggerated." A physician learns to distrust exaggeration. Holmes inclined his head approvingly. You attended Sir Reginald during his final illness, for nearly 12 years, and certified his death. I did, without hesitation, none whatsoever. Holmes studied the physician carefully. Describe precisely what you observed. Dr. Wren answered without consulting his memory. I was summoned shortly after 7 o'clock on Monday morning. Sir Reginald was lying beside his desk. His skin had already cooled considerably. There was no pulse, no respiration, no cardiac activity. The pupils were fixed. Death had occurred at least an hour earlier. You are certain? I stake my professional reputation upon it. Holmes nodded. I expected no less. The doctor seemed slightly surprised. You do not question my competence. I question everything, doctor. Competence least of all. Holmes wandered slowly through the library. The room reflected its late owner with remarkable fidelity. Heavy oak shelves stretched to the ceiling. Leather-bound volumes occupied every available space. A globe stood beside the fireplace. The great writing desk overlooked the gardens through tall leaded windows. Holmes stopped before the desk. This is where Sir Reginald was found. Yes, and nothing has been disturbed. Very little. Holmes crouched. The chair, exactly where it stood. The medicine bottle, removed after examination. The letter, not discovered until yesterday. Holmes ran his fingertips lightly over the polished wood. There is a curious omission. Omission? There is remarkably little dust. Dr. Wren smiled faintly. The servants keep an excellent household. They do indeed. Yet observe this rectangle. He indicated a pale outline upon the desk. A box stood here. Gregory Ashcombe peered over his shoulder. There was a dispatch case. Where is it now? Charles answered from behind them. I have it. You removed it? My father's private correspondence concerns the family. Holmes extended his hand. May I see it? Charles hesitated almost imperceptibly before producing a handsome leather case. Holmes examined its brass clasp. Locked. Yes. The key. We have not found it. Holmes weighed the case thoughtfully, but made no attempt to force it. Interesting. Before further questions could be asked, a butler entered quietly. Beg pardon, Sir Charles. Yes? The undertaker has arrived to make preparations for tomorrow. Holmes's eyes brightened. Excellent timing. The undertaker, Mr. Edwin Barstow, proved to be a stout, practical man whose profession had left him with little patience for melodrama. You're asking whether I reopened the coffin, he repeated. I am. I most certainly did not. When was it last in your possession? Monday afternoon. My assistants and I prepared the body, sealed the coffin, and placed it in the mausoleum before sunset. Who remained present? Sir Charles, Mr. Gregory, the doctor, Mr. Julian Fane for a short while. And afterward? I left. Did anyone request that the coffin remain accessible? Barstow looked puzzled. The lid was screwed only lightly, upon Sir Reginald's standing instructions. He'd always feared being buried alive. So the coffin could be reopened. With an ordinary screwdriver, Holmes thanked him before returning to the library. There he stood for several minutes without speaking. I recognized the expression upon his face. It was the look he wore whenever apparently unrelated details began arranging themselves into some hidden pattern. Finally, he addressed Gregory. You mentioned that Julian Fane disappeared before dawn. Yes. Was anything else found missing? The solicitor reflected. Only his riding coat. No luggage? No. No money withdrawn. Not to my knowledge. Holmes turned to Charles. When did you last see your cousin? Late last evening. Where? Outside the chapel. What was he doing? He refused to say. Did he appear frightened? Charles paused. Yes. Of what? I assumed grief. Holmes's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. No. He spoke the single word with quiet certainty. Not grief. Before anyone could question him, hurried footsteps echoed through the entrance hall. The butler reappeared, his usually composed features visibly shaken. Sir Charles, what is it? One of the gardeners has discovered something near the old boathouse. Charles frowned. What sort of thing? The servant swallowed. A gentleman's walking stick, sir. And blood upon the riverbank. Holmes had already reached for his coat. It would seem. he said quietly, "that Mr. Julian Fane's disappearance is no longer merely a matter of absence." As we hurried from the hall toward the mist-covered grounds, I glanced back once toward the chapel. Through the drifting fog, the squat outline of the mausoleum remained visible, silent and immovable. For reasons I could not then explain, I found myself thinking less of the blood awaiting us by the river than of the coffin resting alone within that stone chamber. Some instinct told me that whatever had happened at the boathouse had not begun there. It had begun the moment someone chose to open a dead man's coffin and conceal the fact from everyone else. The gardener led us along a narrow path that descended through damp woodland toward the edge of the estate. The fog had thinned slightly, though the morning remained cold enough for every breath to linger before us. Beyond the trees lay a small lake fed by the river Wey, where an old stone boathouse stood half hidden beneath drooping willows. "There, sir," the gardener said, pointing with a trembling hand. Near the muddy bank rested a finely crafted ebony walking stick with a silver hound's head handle. A few yards farther, dark stains marked the frost-hardened earth, while reeds at the water's edge had been crushed as though by a violent struggle. Holmes neither touched the stick nor the blood. Instead, he slowly surveyed the entire scene, allowing his eyes to travel from the river to the boathouse and back again. "Remain where you are," he said quietly. I had learned that these simple words invariably concealed a wealth of observation, invisible to the rest of us. Holmes advanced alone. After several moments he crouched near the bloodstains. Taking out his lens, he examined the ground with painstaking care before following a series of faint impressions leading toward the boathouse. When I finally joined him at his invitation, I saw two distinct sets of footprints. "One pair is Julian Fane's," I asked. "So I believe. And the other?" Holmes smiled faintly. "That is precisely the question." He indicated the first trail. "Observe the depth of these impressions. The gentleman who made them walked briskly, but naturally." He then pointed toward a second, less distinct series. "These, however, belong to a heavier individual whose right foot turns outward slightly. You can determine that from so little. The outer edge of every print cuts deeper into the mud than the inner. Habit writes its own signature." Gregory Ashcombe bent over the walking stick. "That certainly belongs to Julian. You recognize it. I commissioned it for him on his 30th birthday." Holmes nodded without looking up. "Then Mr. Fane reached this place." Charles folded his arms impatiently. "And bled. Perhaps. There is blood enough." "Yes," Holmes replied. "Yet curiously little." I looked again. The stains appeared substantial enough to my untrained eye. Holmes picked up a fallen twig and gently traced their outline. "If a man received a fatal wound here, we should expect considerably more blood upon the ground, or within the water. You suggest he survived?" "I suggest only that appearances remain eager to mislead us." His attention shifted toward the boathouse. The weathered structure stood unlocked. Holmes pushed the creaking door inward. Inside were two neglected rowing boats, coils of damp rope, fishing nets, and a workbench littered with rusted tools. Dust lay thick upon everything, except one narrow strip of floor leading to a rear window. Holmes followed it carefully. "The dust has recently been disturbed." He examined the sill. "Someone climbed through here during the night." Charles stepped closer. "Escaping or entering?" Holmes leaned outside. The window overlooked a narrow service road beyond the estate wall. "A carriage could have stopped here without approaching the hall." Gregory stared. "You mean Julian fled?" "I mean someone wished us to think first of murder, and only afterward of flight." Holmes's gaze settled upon the muddy ground outside. "There are wheel tracks." I joined him. "They seem ordinary enough." "They are not." He measured the distance between them with his walking cane. "A light dog cart." "You are certain?" "The wheels are narrow," he pointed again. "Notice also that one iron rim bears a chipped section. Every third revolution leaves a slight interruption in the impression." I saw it then, a tiny gap repeating itself with mechanical regularity. Holmes straightened. "That vehicle has visited this spot before." "How can you know?" "Because yesterday's rain softened a lower layer of earth. These older impressions lie beneath the fresher ones." Charles looked increasingly irritated. What possible connection has this to my father's death? Holmes regarded him steadily. That remains to be discovered. Before further discussion could follow, Dr. Wren arrived, accompanied by 2 servants carrying lanterns. I came as soon as I heard, he said. Holmes greeted him politely before asking, Doctor, have you examined the blood? Dr. Wren knelt briefly. It is certainly human. Recent? Within 12 hours. Enough to kill? The physician hesitated. No. Charles turned sharply. What? Dr. Wren rose. A healthy adult could lose this quantity and survive. For the first time, visible uncertainty crossed Charles Ashcombe's face. Holmes appeared almost satisfied. So our missing gentleman may still be alive. If this blood is his. Quite. Holmes removed a small folded paper from his pocket. The note written by Sir Reginald. He read its single sentence once more. If they bury me before Thursday, they shall commit murder. He replaced it thoughtfully. Interesting. What is? I asked. The wording. Gregory looked puzzled. You have already mentioned that. Yes. Holmes glanced toward the hall, where the chapel roof could just be seen above the trees. Sir Reginald did not write, I shall be murdered. Nor did he write, someone intends to kill me. No. He wrote, if they bury me before Thursday, they shall commit murder. Holmes spoke the words slowly. The act of burial itself was essential. I felt a chill wholly unrelated to the November air. You think he expected to awaken? Holmes shook his head. No. Then what? He remained silent for several moments before answering. I think Sir Reginald understood something about his own death that no one else has yet perceived. As we began the walk back toward Blackthorn Hall, Holmes suddenly stopped and looked toward the distant family chapel. A solitary figure had emerged from behind the mausoleum. The person wore a dark cloak and broad-brimmed hat. The instant the stranger realized we had seen them, they disappeared behind the yew trees. Without a word, Holmes broke into a run. I followed close behind, with the others struggling to keep pace. By the time we reached the chapel grounds, the figure had vanished. Only the iron door of the mausoleum remained before us. It stood slightly open. Holmes halted upon the threshold. When I came beside him, I saw why. Sir Reginald Ashcombe's coffin, which only an hour earlier had rested firmly upon its stone platform, now lay open, and it was empty. For the briefest instant, no one spoke. The empty coffin seemed to drain the very air from the mausoleum. Eleanor Ashcombe uttered a faint cry, while Gregory Ashcombe instinctively removed his hat. Charles Ashcombe stood motionless, his face drained of color. Dr. Wren stared into the vacant interior with the bewilderment of a man whose professional certainty had been shaken. Holmes alone remained perfectly composed. He did not rush to inspect the coffin. Instead, he examined the stone floor surrounding it, then the hinges, then the underside of the lid. "My dear Watson," he said quietly, "our murderer has just made his first genuine mistake." "You mean the empty coffin?" "No. The timing." He pointed to the dust upon the stone shelf. "The coffin was emptied only within the last quarter of an hour. Observe how the disturbed dust has not yet settled evenly. Whoever removed the body knew we had gone to the river." Charles turned sharply. "Are you suggesting someone watched us?" "I am certain of it." Holmes stepped outside and studied the damp ground surrounding the mausoleum. Fresh footprints led toward the yew hedge before disappearing upon the gravel path. "They wished us to discover the empty coffin," Holmes continued. "It was intended to produce confusion and, more importantly, to delay tomorrow's funeral." He turned suddenly toward Gregory. "The dispatch case, the one from the library?" "Precisely. Bring it to me." Within minutes, the leather case had been placed upon the library table. Holmes examined its brass lock before producing from his pocket a slender steel instrument. "You are picking it?" I asked. "I am merely assisting a stubborn mechanism." A soft click followed. Inside lay estate papers, correspondence, and, beneath them all, a sealed envelope bearing Holmes's immediate attention. It was addressed simply to whoever learns the truth too late. Gregory Ashcombe broke the seal with trembling fingers and began reading aloud. For many months I have suspected that my heart medicine has been altered. My weakness has grown worse only after taking it. I have therefore ceased using the prescribed bottle and substituted plain distilled water. If I am nevertheless declared dead before Thursday, know that my fears were justified. The man responsible will seek one thing above all others: the reading of my will after my burial. Silence followed. Dr. Wren looked utterly stunned. My medicine altered? Holmes nodded. Not by you, Doctor. Charles spoke hoarsely. Then by whom? Holmes's eyes rested calmly upon him. No. Charles blinked. No? You are guilty of impatience, Sir Charles, but not murder. He turned instead toward Gregory Ashcombe. The solicitor, if you please. Gregory's face lost every trace of composure. This is madness. On the contrary. Holmes folded his hands behind his back. You alone possessed unrestricted access to Sir Reginald's private documents. You knew the contents of the will long before anyone else. Gregory attempted a smile. And what motive would I possess? The final codicil. Holmes removed another folded paper from the dispatch case. This amendment was signed only 6 days before Sir Reginald's apparent death. Gregory lunged forward. Holmes stepped neatly aside. The solicitor's movement had been answer enough. Lestrade, whom Holmes had quietly summoned by telegram immediately after examining the riverbank, entered through the library doors with 2 constables. I believe, Holmes remarked pleasantly, that Mr. Gregory Ashcombe has just identified himself. The solicitor's shoulders sagged. It changes nothing, he muttered. On the contrary, Holmes replied. It explains everything. He turned toward the assembled family. Sir Reginald had discovered irregularities within his investments. Large sums had disappeared over several years. Only a trusted solicitor could have concealed them. Gregory closed his eyes. The old man began asking questions. So you gradually weakened him. I altered the heart tonic in tiny amounts, enough to produce alarming symptoms, but not immediate death. Dr. Wren looked horrified. My examinations were influenced by the symptoms Mr. Gregory carefully manufactured. Holmes continued. When Sir Reginald realized what was happening, he secretly stopped taking the medicine and wrote the warning we found. But why the funeral? Eleanor asked. Because the will contained one fatal surprise. Holmes opened the codicil. In the event of Sir Reginald's unnatural death, every financial account was to undergo an independent audit before probate. Gregory whispered bitterly. He suspected me. He did. And if the funeral proceeded normally, the audit would reveal your theft. So I needed the body. Holmes inclined his head. You intended to remove it, manufacture the appearance of resurrection or supernatural disappearance, postpone the funeral indefinitely, and destroy the amended will during the resulting confusion. The blood by the river? Lestrade asked. Animal blood, Holmes replied. Applied to suggest violence. And Julian? Holmes smiled. Our missing gentleman ceased being missing this morning. Every eye turned toward him. Holmes crossed to the adjoining room and opened the door. Julian Fane stepped inside, pale but unharmed. Eleanor hurried to embrace him. Julian looked toward the company. Mr. Holmes asked me to remain concealed. Holmes nodded. Mr. Fane heard someone tampering with the coffin during the night. Rather than confronting the intruder, he wisely informed me in confidence after receiving my telegram. Together we arranged a small deception of our own. Julian smiled faintly. We allowed our culprit to believe I had disappeared. And today, Holmes continued, when we were conveniently occupied at the riverbank, Mr. Gregory attempted to remove the body, hidden within the false compartment, beneath the mausoleum floor. Lestrade stared. Beneath the floor, Holmes lifted a loose flagstone with the tip of his cane. Below it lay a narrow stone chamber. Within rested the body of Sir Reginald Ashcombe. Gregory buried his face in his hands. It was finished the moment you examined the coffin lock, he murmured. It was finished, Holmes corrected gently, the moment you believed appearances mattered more than evidence. The funeral, postponed only long enough for the coroner's formal investigation, was held 2 days later with the dignity Sir Reginald deserved. The amended will restored the family's fortunes, while Gregory Ashcombe was convicted not only of embezzlement, but of the calculated poisoning that had ultimately brought about his client's death. As for Dr. Wren, the discovery that his medicines had been secretly substituted absolved him entirely, though the blow to his confidence lingered for many months. When Watson and Holmes returned to Baker Street, I could not refrain from expressing my admiration. "You solved the affair from a handful of scratches upon a coffin." Holmes laughed softly. "My dear Watson, I solved it because the scratches contradicted a story everyone else had accepted. And the greatest clue? The sentence itself. If they bury me before Thursday, they shall commit murder. Exactly. Sir Reginald did not predict a miracle. He predicted human greed." He settled comfortably into his armchair and reached for his violin. There is nothing more deceptive than a conclusion reached before the evidence has finished speaking. Before I could reply, Mrs. Hudson entered carrying the morning correspondence. Holmes glanced over the letters and smiled faintly as one envelope caught his eye. "It appears, Watson, that London has once again found itself incapable of behaving sensibly." I laughed. Despite the grim memories of Blackthorn Hall, the violin remained untouched. A new mystery had already begun.